Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most debated, most consequential phrases in the entire New Testament, the so-called acceptive clause on divorce found in the Gospel of Matthew.
All right, let's just jump right in and frame the central mystery here. Because on the surface, it looks like we have a flat-out contradiction, a single verse in one gospel that seems to create this loophole in what the rest of the Bible presents as an absolute rock-solid rule.
Yeah, this all boils down to one core question, right? Did Jesus actually permit divorce and remarriage in the case of adultery? It feels like the answer is yes or no, depending on which book you happen to be reading, and that's the puzzle we need to solve today.
Okay, so look at this. Here's the problem, side by side. You've got Matthew 19:9, and he says you can't divorce your wife except for unchastity. But then you jump over to Mark's version of the exact same conversation, and poof, the exception is gone. It's just whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, period. No exceptions.
So how in the world do we solve this? Well, like any good detective, we have to start gathering clues. We need to dig into the text, look at the history, and see what other evidence we can find that might shed some light on what Matthew's accept clause really means. And our first big clue is just how consistent the rest of the New Testament is on this. You look at Mark, you look at Luke, it's absolute. You look at Paul's letters, Romans, 1 Corinthians, again, totally absolute. And think about this. Paul was writing to places like Corinth and Rome. I mean, these were sexually lax cultures, to put it mildly. If there was a common sense exception for adultery, don't you think he would have mentioned it just once?
Then there's clue number 2, the disciples' reaction. I mean, they are completely floored by what Jesus says. Their response is basically, whoa, wait a minute. If that's how it is, it's better not to get married at all. Now, that level of shock, that only makes sense if they heard something totally new, something radical, not just, a stricter version of a rule they already knew.
Okay, now we get to what might be the biggest clue of all. It's all about one little Greek word. The word Matthew uses in his exception is porneia. Now, it's super important to understand this isn't just a fancy synonym for adultery. It's a much, much broader term. It can mean all sorts of sexual unlawfulness, fornication, incest, you name it.
And why does that matter so much? Because the Greek language does have a very specific, very precise word just for adultery. That word is moicheia. It means one thing and one thing only: infidelity by a spouse inside a valid marriage.
So you see the question this raises, right? In the exact same sentence where Matthew uses the general word porneia for the exception, he uses the specific word for adultery, moicheia, to talk about what happens when you remarry. He knew both words. He used both words. He clearly meant two different things. So the million-dollar question is, why?
Okay, so with all these clues on the table, the consistency of the other Gospels, the disciples' shock, and this super specific word choice, how has Christianity made sense of it all over the last 2,000 years? Well, it's led to 3 major and pretty distinct interpretations.
So here's a quick breakdown of the 3 main views. First, you have the common Protestant interpretation. It sees porneia as covering sexual immorality in general, including adultery. So in that view, the innocent spouse can remarry. Then you have the Orthodox Church. They agree marriage is for life, but they have this pastoral approach that allows for something called an ecclesiastical divorce in some cases. And finally, you have the Catholic view, which argues porneia doesn't mean adultery at all. It means an invalid union from the get-go, something like incest. In that case, a valid marriage can never be dissolved, only annulled.
Yeah, that Orthodox approach is really unique. It's built on this principle called oikonomia. Think of it as economy or stewardship. It basically gives church authorities some pastoral leeway to apply God's law with mercy in really tough human situations, like a marriage that is completely and totally broken down.
All right, so let's zoom in on one of these interpretations for a minute, the one that claims it can harmonize all the clues we've looked at. This is the traditional view, and it's most clearly spelled out by the Catholic Church. The argument is that the accept clause isn't really an exception at all. So according to this view, the clause doesn't give you permission to end a valid marriage. Not at all. Instead, it's addressing 2 very specific situations. The first, and most important, is that porneia refers to a union that was never valid in the first place, what we'd call grounds for an annulment today. The other possibility is that it gives grounds for spouses to physically separate, live apart, but without actually breaking that marriage bond. They'd still be married.
And the logic for that main explanation, the annulment one, is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1. The word porneia refers to an illicit union, something forbidden by Jewish law, like marrying a close relative. Step 2. If the union was unlawful from the start, then in God's eyes, he never joined them together.
So step 3, the divorce isn't actually dissolving a marriage. It's just a formal declaration that a real marriage never existed to begin with. And that, right there, would explain Matthew's very specific choice of words.
You know, there's a really great analogy that makes this distinction super clear. The annulment view is like inspecting a bridge and declaring it was never built correctly in the first place. See, you're not destroying a perfectly good bridge, you're just recognizing that it was never a sound, safe structure to begin with.
And that's a world away from how many people see divorce. That view is like taking a perfectly sound, functioning bridge with cars on it and claiming you have the authority to just saw it right in half. One is an act of recognizing a flaw, the other is an act of destruction. Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds with ancient Greek words and biblical interpretation. But why does any of this still matter so much today? Well, because this whole debate isn't just about some ancient rule. It's about the very nature of what marriage is supposed to be.
Because the argument is that Jesus wasn't just, tweaking the rules. He was doing something truly radical. He was trying to restore marriage to God's original plan from creation, a one-flesh union that's permanent, indissoluble, a sacred covenant, not just a temporary contract. In a way, he was hitting the reset button, revoking the concessions that were made because of our hardness of heart, and taking marriage all the way back to the beginning.
And it all comes back to this one single sentence. This is the absolute foundation of his entire teaching. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. See, that frames marriage as a divine act, something God creates, which means human beings don't have the authority to just undo it. And ultimately, this teaching is seen as more than just a rule for couples. It's a defense of the family itself, and by extension, all of society. The argument goes that when the permanence of marriage is weakened, it introduces this disorder that harms everyone involved, but especially children, who can be traumatized by that separation.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really challenging thought to chew on. This ancient debate forces us to ask a very modern question. In a world that so often treats relationships like temporary contracts, what does it truly mean to believe in and to try and live out the idea of a permanent, unbreakable covenant?